knows about Anita Hill.
The sexual harassment storm around Clarence Thomas is intensifying.
I trust that the Senate will confirm this able man promptly.
Once I got subpoenaed, I knew what I had to do. I'm going to tell what happened to me.
She had no idea that she was walking into the political lion's den.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do. I can only imagine how difficult it must have been with her testifying.
It was unusual in how graphic the details were.
He measured his penis in terms of length.
And strange.
The name that was referred to was Long Dong Silver.
I think they were trying to trip her up.
I was on trial.
I've got statements from people that know her saying, watch out for this woman.
The issue became my character.
It didn't occur to her that an opposition campaign would be waged.
Bomb threats to my house, sexual violence.
Why would someone make up this story?
This wasn't about the truth. They were humiliating her.
This hearing is a circus, a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks.
They didn't want to appear to be going after a black man who said, I didn't do it.
These conversations, did he say, I have great physical capability and attributes, or was he more graphic?
He was much more graphic.
There were a lot of facts that they didn't want the public to know.
This is an important issue, and the dialogue should not stop here.
To any victim of sexual harassment, the message is nobody's going to take you seriously, not even the United States Senate.
You are not drawing a conclusion that Judge Thomas sexually harassed you.
Yes, I am drawing that conclusion. That
well,
is
then
my...
I don't understand.
Well, let me try to explain again.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Wow, yes, that was me 25 years ago with more hair. And this is me now, still trying to explain. But not my testimony, something much more basic. That women are entitled to work and be educated in places free of sexual harassment. It's that simple. In fact, equality demands that women's lives and their work be valued the same as men. So I could talk to you now for probably another couple of hours if we had it about Thomas's behavior. I could answer some questions that people have about, oh, which of the senators was exactly the worst of them? But I can refer you, as they say in the classroom, I'll refer you to C-SPAN, where the tape is there. It's all there. The 8 hours of the testimony is there from 25 years ago. And I'll let you pick out for yourselves who you think was the worst. We're in a new day today. And so today, rather than entirely go back over that episode, I want us to think a little bit forward. After we just take some time, though, to think about what has happened in the past 25 years. And that's important, because we can't really move forward until we understand some of the lessons from the past. So I want to start with just a little background from the 70s and 80s and even the 90s. And believe me, I'll go through those decades pretty quickly. And I'm just going to simply say that in 1970s, the laws protecting against sexual harassment were on the books. Nevertheless, in a survey that was taken in 1976, 9 out of 10 women reported to Redbook magazine that they had been subjected to unwanted sexual advances at work. And even in the 1980s, there were judges who ruled from the bench that sexual extortion and verbal abuse were not civil rights violations. They were simply personal matters. And despite a ruling that Annie Clark referred to against the Yale University in 1980, despite that ruling in favor of students' claims for protection under Title IX, the Department of Education offered little guidance to colleges and universities about how to process campus sexual harassment and assault claims. In the 90s, the EEOC, as late as 91 in particular, and that's my reference point, the EEOC, which is a federal agency in charge of enforcing rules against sexual harassment in the workplace, had only begun to develop guidelines. And the Department of Education was still quiet. Workers and students were left on their own to navigate the abuses that they experienced. And it's no wonder that most women didn't complain. Why would they bother, considering that it was something you just had to put up with instead of seeing it as a civil rights violation? So that's where we were, and against that backdrop, I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And the testimony came about because I was subpoenaed. The subpoena called me to testify specifically, and I quote, sexual harassment that I had experienced. And I did. I talked about what it was like to work with Clarence Thomas, and I offered my testimony as evidence of Judge Thomas's lack of fitness for the appointment to the country's highest court. The integrity of the entire judicial system was at stake for me. Once confirmed, Thomas would be sitting in judgment of harassment cases. The matter was not one of my civil rights. Access to equal justice for all was at stake. And I knew it, and I thought the Senate should know it as well. Days after the gavel to the hearings fell, Thomas was confirmed, as you know, and I went back home to return to my life. And seemingly nothing had changed, and we all thought that was the end of the story. The pundits said that no woman would ever come forward to file a sexual harassment complaint after witnessing my treatment during the confirmation hearings. And some even blamed me for even bringing up the subject, saying that I had set women back. Yet, I got a letter, and I started getting thousands of letters, actually. I got a letter from a woman who described herself as a retired teacher, a band teacher in Oregon. And she said, there will be waves of women after you. I had no idea what she was talking about. But it turned out that this teacher was right. The pundits were wrong. So after I went back to Oklahoma, across the country, people started to speak up. They started to make sure that women could complain about sexual harassment. With the help of organizations like the National Women's Law Center, and that was one of the first organizations actually to reach out to me, working women mobilized their rights, and claims with the EEOC doubled in 2 years. And claims in the courts soared as well. And at employees' assistance, workplaces responded, instituting policies and procedures where none had existed before. We did a lot of work on these issues just by stepping up and even just sharing our stories. And so many of the stories that I hear now are from women who heard from their mothers about their experiences in the workplace. And sadly, their mothers' experiences match their own. For me, one of the most damaging positions that was taken was that I would hear from these reporters, and they would say, of course, they would say as though they spoke for all, black people are against you. How do you respond to that? And then a group of women called African American Women in Defense of Ourselves took out a full-page ad in the New York Times. And they started this ad, and within 6 hours, they got 1,000 people to sign on it. Now, I'm telling you this because I'm going to, it's kind of hard to think back now about what that time was like in 1991. And I suspect some of you weren't born, or even if you weren't really looking or reading the New York Times. But there was an energy that no one had anticipated. And these stories kept coming to me, but they kept being shared around the country. And the concerns haven't been limited to sexual harassment. These past 25 years, I've received letters from a whole host of people, women and men. And they talk about a whole variety of issues that women experience. In particular, sexual harassment, sexual assault, domestic violence, childhood abuse. One of the most troubling letters that I received was from a chaplain's office. And this was a college chaplain who told me that he and his wife had both worked in the chaplain's office, and that they were always being referred to by students and teachers and officials, even though they had no authority to investigate or to try complaints of sexual harassment or assault. Those problems were not being treated as legal matters. They were being treated as spiritual matters. Women were sent to therapy to heal, not for any redress. So this is where we were. But where we moved was that we found out that we could succeed in courts. And we have had many successes. Male-on-male harassment is now actionable. Students can hold schools accountable for peers when peers harass them. And we have all read the stories recently about colleges and universities that have held fraternities and athletic teams accountable for harassing women on campus. The EEOC has held large-scale farm operations accountable for sexual assault of migrant workers. This was once thought to be an isolated problem, the problem of sexual harassment. But we now know that sexual violence occurs in all sectors of our workforces, on colleges. It occurs to women across the board, regardless of race, regardless of color, regardless of religion and ethnicity. And it occurs to people of all sexual identities and orientations. We have moved to stop violence in the workplace, and harassment is violence, trust me. Unlike what people will want to tell you that it's just sort of genuine interest gone overboard. Harassment is violence. But self-help alone is not going to do the job. We need our institutions to step up and take responsibility, to do more to end this problem. We have started the effort. And in many ways, I consider this moment a setback. We still are struggling with this problem. 1 in 3 women between the ages of 18 and 24 say they have been harassed on the job. And just last week in the Boston Globe, I read about the harassment of women in the restaurant industry, where tipped workers have to put up with being kissed and touched and groped without their approval just to be able to make a living wage. And think also that it took scores of women to come forward against Bill Cosby before America was willing to accept, to even fathom that he, America's dad, might in fact have possibly drugged and assaulted women. And the high headline cases offer me little comfort. I know Gretchen Carlson has won a $20 million suit, and that's an advance, that's progress. But Roger Ailes was still given a $40 million severance pay. So we have to be willing to punish those who cause us harm, no matter how high they are in power, no matter how much money they bring our company. So these are some hard questions. So where are we now? What is it that we have to do? Well, first of all, we have to stop thinking about sexual harassment as just some isolated thing. It typically occurs in combination with other forms of discrimination, like pay discrimination, like assignment disparities, like biased reviews, whether they're biased because of an unconscious bias or not, and I like women who are being promoted or passed over for promotions. And in fact, in some cases, having to train the people who become their bosses. Now, I'm sure none of this happens to you in your workplaces, but maybe you know someone where it does, or someplace where it does. Or maybe in your workplace, it's just the sense that you're not heard. When a guy comes up 5 minutes after you've spoken with an idea that you've already explained, and everybody applauds, you're not probably thinking this is discrimination, but it is just one more of those factors that cause us to not be able to live up to our fullest opportunities and our potentials. And let me just say this. For sexual harassment and sexual assault in particular, recently you have heard that, you know, this is just something that men do. We've heard that in a particular setting. It's just what guys do. Like leaving the toilet seat up, right? But no. This effort to normalize sexual misconduct is nothing but a ploy to excuse predatory behavior, whether it happens in the workplace, on the streets, or in our schools. We must raise our voices, just as we did 25 years ago, to say enough is enough. So I've been referring to these letters a lot, and I'm going to refer to one now. I got a group of letters from a 7th grade class. A teacher had advised them they had shown them parts of the hearings, and they asked them to talk about it. And they wrote me, and one girl said, "We took votes about who we think would win. It seemed Clarence Thomas had won. The score was 30-19. I voted for you and wish you had won, but you didn't." Nevertheless, she had figured it out. She says, "I think it's unfair because most judges are men and they usually pick the men to win." And then she became philosophical. "Well, I'm sorry you didn't win, but life has to go on." And she was right. Life does go on, and mine has gone on. And it's not as though it's been universally sort of this warm hug around the world. That has not been the case. I've certainly had my detractors and still do, and I'm certainly haunted by trolls, as many of you might be. But now is once again the time for us to draw upon our most courageous selves so that when we look at the next 7th grade class, we will be able to tell them that we did everything that we could in our power to end sexual harassment, to end sexual assault, to end gender discrimination in their lifetime so that the next generation does not live what we and our mothers lived through. We must share our stories with our daughters and our sons. We must raise our voices in our workplaces, and we must make our systems work for us, whether they are the government systems, business systems, or educational institutions. Today, we are told to stop talking about gender equality because no one cares. But I hope that when I leave here today, I will have your word that you care about gender equality. And I would say to those who tell us to stop talking about it, this is what I would say. Today, I get to choose how and when I talk without a subpoena. And I get to decide what changes need to occur in this society to make for a fairer and more just society. 25 years ago, I found my voice, and I will not lose it again. And you, many of you out there found yours too, and now is the time to find it one more time. And if you ask me if I would do it all over again, my answer would be yes. Yes, I would. And I thank you and hope you'll join with me. Thank you.